I've just finished my second ball of yarn and I'm measuring my scarf and I see that it is almost 118 centimeters. See, I'm making a scarf in a child size and according to the pattern it should be 120 centimeters long before I'm ready to bind off stitches. So right now I have a choice whether I'm gonna bind off stitches right away and avoid attaching a new ball, or I could attach a new ball of yarn and work for 2 more centimeters to be in line with the pattern instructions. The first option is better for me because first I really enjoy using up the yarn. I really like to bind off stitches when I have just a bit of yarn left and I have just enough to bind up. Another thing is I don't like to start a new ball of yarn and then, because I know it will be sitting in my stash forever, because you know those like half balls, they just stay around for a while. While a new ball of yarn is kind of a full ball and I could use it for some other project and know that I would have enough yarn for that project. I decided to stop here and to bind off stitches now, so I'm basically disobeying the pattern even though I wrote it myself. That's my choice and that's completely in line with the Russian knitting philosophy, which says make do and improvise. It's okay to not to follow the pattern instructions exactly to a T. It's okay to just look at the situation that you have on hand and decide for yourself whether you want to make it a certain length or make some other decision according whether to follow the pattern instructions or to change them, because the pattern is just a guideline and you are the maker. Remember it, you are the person who makes it, and if you feel that you should make something different in the pattern, it is totally okay to do so. I will make my scarf a little bit shorter and I'm gonna to bind off stitches right now. So if you are like me and you like to use up the yarn and you want to work on your scarf as long as you have the yarn until you run out of it almost, then make sure you stop when you have enough yarn to bind off stitches, and that would be about 4 times the width of the project. So if I take my yarn tail and measure it 4 times the width, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3 and 4, I see that I clearly have enough and I even have some more. If you have way more, if you have double that length, then you can confidently work another row, but for me I will stop now and start binding off stitches. We want this scarf to look the same on both sides of the work. We want to make sure that the chain of stitches formed by the bind off method is sitting on top of the edge, not on one of the sides of it, like the right side or the wrong side, because frankly this scarf doesn't have a right or wrong side. So we want it to be completely reversible and we want this chain of stitches to stay on top of the project. And to do that, we're gonna bind off stitches in pattern, and that means we're gonna follow the same knit 2 purl 1 pattern when we bind off stitches. Here's how we do it. So I'm gonna get another needle, and first we knit 2 stitches together. We use the most common bind off technique in Russian knitting, and it is as easy as anything else in Russian knitting pretty much. Or we go from right to left into the first 2 stitches, and this time it's going to be the selvage stitch and the next stitch that would be a knit stitch if we were to follow the pattern instructions, to follow the pattern repeat still. We knit these 2 stitches together like this, and then we place this new stitch on the left needle. We do it purlwise to make sure we do not twist the stitch. Unless, of course, you want to have twisted stitches on top of the of your edge, which is totally fine, so do that if you feel like that. The next stitch in the pattern is a knit 2, so we're gonna knit these 2 stitches together again, just like this. And then we know that the stitch after that, this one, is going to be a purl. And that means that we're going to purl next 2 stitches. But before we do that, we want to bring the yarn to the front of the work right now. So we bring the yarn to the front of the work, and then we place this new stitch on the left needle. So now when we're gonna purl 2 stitches together, the yarn is already where it should be, and we don't have to wrap the edge, bringing the yarn to the front right now. And this way we are not gonna damage this beautiful look of the chain of the stitches that are forming at the bind off edge. So we purl these 2 stitches together. And now we know that the next stitch is going to be a knit. So basically we do the same thing. We knit 2, purl 1, but we do it while we bind off stitches. So the next stitch is going to be a knit. So that means we bring the yarn to the back of the work right now before we slip the stitch to the left needle. We bring the yarn to the back, and now we knit 2 stitches together, and then we knit the next 2 stitches together, and then we bring the yarn to the front and purl 2 stitches together. And see what I'm doing as I place the yarn, as I place the stitch on the left needle, I keep the right needle in the stitch. So I'm repositioning the needle right away to save myself some time. Because if I place the stitch, take the needle out, then I get into the stitch again, it takes those milliseconds that we could save, right, and use for something else, something more productive. As you place the stitch on the needle, don't remove the right needle from the stitch, but instead reposition it to knit 2 stitches together or purl 2 stitches together. And you do it until you get to the last stitch of the row. And the last repeat, knit, knit, and purl 2 together, and we have 2 stitches left, so we're gonna knit them together or purl them together, it doesn't really matter. So knitting is usually easy. And that's it. We have a lovely bind off edge that is sitting on top of the fabric, not on one side of it, and that makes the scarf completely reversible. See, it looks exactly the same on both sides of the work. So now we have this last stitch left. Cut the yarn, leaving a small tail, just enough to weave it in later on, or if you used up the yarn, then don't cut anything and simply pass this yarn tail through the last stitch and pull tight to secure. So I'm gonna put the needles aside, we're not gonna need them anymore, in this project at least. And now the scarf is basically ready, but we're gonna beautify it a bit. We're gonna hide the tails and we're gonna see whether to block it or not to block it. First, let's deal with the tails. There is no special way to weave in tails in Russian knitting. Please feel free to use any method that you normally use when you weave in tails. I usually do it in a way that is pretty secure, so I'm going to show you how to do it. Thread one of the tails into a wool needle. And because this stitch pattern is based on ribbing, it is better to hide the tails vertically. So if you look at the scarf this way, it's going to be vertical. And because we left all tails along the edge of the scarf, it makes sense to hide the tails right along the edge, right after the chain of the selvage stitches. I usually do it this way. I would run the wool needle through several stitches, and in this case it's going to be vertically, and it's going to be right after the chain of selvage stitches. And I try to split the yarn as often as I can. Just go through the strand as often as I can, and that's why, see, I'm using a smaller wool needle, because I want to split the yarn. Those bigger wool needles, they usually have a really blunt edge that is not a blunt tip, that is not slim enough to get into a fine yarn like this one in DK weight. I use a thinner needle, so I could get, you can even use a big sewing needle, nothing wrong with that too. and get into the yarn. So that's especially important with wools, because if you do it in wool, then the yarn will felt in with time, and then there is no chance that the tail will get out of its hiding place. And then pull the yarn through. Make sure that you have enough yarn in here so that the fabric is not tight like this. To do that, simply pull the fabric along the direction of knitting, and then make a few stitches back in the opposite direction. I usually go right into the same strand, right into this particular tail, but I don't start right away, otherwise it will just get out, right? I skip one of the stitches and then I go into the strand, and again splitting the yarn as often as I can. This way we do a thing that is similar to the Russian join, the join that is known as a Russian join when we get inside the yarn, but we do it kind of after we already used this yarn in the project. And then pull the yarn through and trim the tail. And then do the same thing to all of your tails, and your scarf will be ready. This particular stitch pattern is quite textured, so there is no need to block it generally. But if you want to open up the pattern to make the scarf a bit wider, then either dry block it, simply pull it sideways and then pull it along the direction of knitting, or block it the regular way, either wet it or steam it, it's totally up to you. I blocked the other end of this scarf to show you how the scarf looks when it's blocked. See, it does look neater, it looks more kind of well polished, and it looks wider. If you take a look at these two ends, you would see that the blocked end looks wider, which is great, but you know, the texture looks nice on either end. So if you have time and you want to make your scarf wider and more even looking, then go ahead and block it. Otherwise, unblocked scarf will be as warm and nice for somebody who's gonna wear it. You, or maybe some lucky person who's gonna get it as a gift. That's it, the waffle scarf is ready. Thank you so much for joining me in this knit along. I hope you enjoyed making your scarf, and I hope that you had an opportunity to appreciate the simplicity of the Russian knitting style.